Resisting law enforcement isn't always about physical force. Understand the legal gray areas that can make or break a resisting arrest case. Hi, I'm Marc Lopez, former prosecutor turned defender of the people. Let's talk about resisting law enforcement. Resisting law enforcement is actually 3 crimes. Number 1, forcibly resisting, obstructing, or interfering with an officer doing his job. Starts as an A misdemeanor, but it can, if there's injury, jump to a felony pretty quick. Number 2, forcibly obstructing, interfering, or resisting the service of court papers. Think about subpoenas or warrants or anything like that. Again, that starts as a misdemeanor, but it can quickly go up to a felony if people get hurt. That one's not too common. Now, the 3rd resisting law enforcement is fleeing from a law enforcement officer after they've made themselves known by visible or audio means. That starts as an A misdemeanor if someone is running on foot. If a car is involved, it jumps up to a level 6 felony. And if people are hurt, well, that gets serious really fast. So one of the big issues we have with resisting law enforcement is this forcibly. And forcibly, people start thinking, well, I didn't throw a punch, Mark, I've been overcharged. You do not need to throw a punch to be charged with resisting law enforcement. Even a modest amount of force is necessary. And so what we typically see is for the forcible is people get in handcuffs and they start spinning, or they start trying to jump up around, or they start trying to do anything once they've been handcuffed and they're jumping and hurting. Now, simply, what are you doing back there? That's not going to be enough for resisting law enforcement. It has to be something more than just a simple turn. Hey, you're hurting me. We're talking actual, like, forcibly resisting, obstructing, or interfering. Now, it goes without saying, if you push an officer while they're trying to arrest you or talk with you, if you throw a punch, that's obviously resisting law enforcement. It's probably a bunch of other crimes too, but we're talking more for this video, just we see a lot of just shaking the elbows back and forth, not wanting to be put into a police car, trying to stand back up, the officer's pushing him down, hey, sit down here, person popping back up, brushing against the officer. You want to be very careful. The courts give lots of deference to police officers, and many court opinions are all about, hey, we have to do X, Y, and Z for officer safety. And courts are increasingly willing to infringe on people's rights in the name of officer safety. And rightfully so in some cases. We don't want to make officers' jobs dangerous. However, we also don't want to overcharge people who are simply complaining about being arrested. Why are you arresting me? What's going on? I didn't do anything wrong. We want is a very fine line we want to balance. But that is something we consistently see. Resisting law enforcement is very easily charged. And if a person's moving around too much, hitting an officer, brushing against an officer, pushing against an officer, again, it's going to be hard to fight against Indiana's liberal use of resisting law enforcement. Now, there are some important considerations. Number 1, the person has to know it's a police officer. So we have cases in Indiana where officers are working off duty at bars, security, and someone is being in a bar, they're getting loud, and an officer places their hand on the person shoves the hand off, resisting law enforcement. The person didn't know the bouncer was a police officer. The officer didn't announce it. So the person has to know it's a police officer before they can be convicted of resisting law enforcement. Number 2, the officers have to be engaged in their lawful duties. If an officer is using excessive force, if the officer is not involved in his lawful duties, such as sticking his foot in the door when he shouldn't be, and the person closes the door, that's not resisting law enforcement because the officer is exceeding his lawful duties. It's a very delicate and easy to cross line. And if the officer feels like you're doing something against him, you're probably going to get arrested. You might be able to prove yourself not guilty in court, but just understand the not engaged in the lawful execution of duty, that's a hard uphill battle. We don't mind uphill battles, just understand it's an uphill battle. And number 3, regarding the fleeing, before an officer can stop somebody, there has to be probable cause. So if an officer lacks probable cause and they're ordering someone to stop and that person keeps going, well, that's not going to be resisting law enforcement. Again, that's something we're going to have to prove after the fact. You're probably not going to be able to avoid the arrest if an officer tells you to stop and then you go. But we'll fight like hell, get a not guilty or a dismissal on that case. So regarding the not probable cause before I fled, well, you might beat the charge, but you're not going to beat the ride, as they say. And one more thing about forcible resisting. Simply not cooperating is not forcible enough to rise level of resisting law enforcement. You're under arrest. No, I'm not. As long as you're not forcibly resisting, that's not resisting law enforcement. Non-compliance is not going to be enough for resisting law enforcement. Now, you got to be careful. Non-compliance might end up you getting a little bit of police brutality, and we'll fight that too. But just understand, be careful with that. That's all. Resisting law enforcement is a very interesting crime because it's very easily charged. And prosecutors and even some judges hate people who have been charged and convicted of resisting law enforcement. They see those people as not having respect for the authority of the police, having respect for the authority of law enforcement. And maybe they do, maybe they don't. But just understand, a lot of judges and prosecutors look very disfavorably on resisting law enforcement. And then also, if you get convicted of resisting law enforcement for the rest of your life, if you get pulled over for a traffic violation, the officer's going to type your information in, and they're going to see resisting law enforcement. And they're going to be not so pleasant to you because they're going to expect you to be a jerk. It's one of those things, self-fulfilling prophecy. So just understand it's a serious crime. Resisting law enforcement starts as an A misdemeanor, 1 year in jail, $5,000 fine. If it's charged as a felony because a car was involved, because officer said, ouch, then it's 2.5 years in jail, $10,000 fine. God forbid something's worse than that. It only increases in penalty and fines. So keep that in mind. Resisting law enforcement is not fun. If you've been charged with resisting law enforcement, you need to have a criminal defense attorney who knows what they're doing, knows how to attack those charges, and understands the best way to deal with this. So if you have any questions about resisting law enforcement or any criminal charge, give me a call, 317-632-3642. We will talk about criminal defense all day. It is a passion of the attorneys at this law firm to defend people charged with any crime, including resisting law enforcement. But most importantly, remember to always plead the fifth.